set some goals here for tonight. Let's see, what do we want to do? So we'll need to download EvenG. That's going to be the platform that we're going to be using for the lab environment. So EvenG is going to be used for the lab environment. As we progress towards other networking goals, or even non-networking goals, it gives us flexibility to go to non-Cisco equipment, can use Juniper, Arista, things of that nature. So we're going to download that. We need to copy the Cisco images over to EvenG, and then do a basic test. If we have time, we can start reviewing CCNA topics, kind of get prepared for that, some of the content that we'll be going over in future videos. But for now, let's start getting the ball rolling on downloading EvenG. Okay, so it looks like EvenG has a couple of different options here. We can either do a free option or we can do a paid option. See what some of the benefits are. The NAT cloud could be a big one. We want to test access to the internet for maybe some API calls or floating static routes. There's something about links too. Yeah, being able to apply link quality delay, that may be good to have if we're allowing some SD-WAN type of features. I thought I remember seeing something about a hot link. Yeah, hot connection. So this is a problem with the free version. In order to add a link between two different nodes and for that link to be recognized without having to reboot those nodes, you need the pro version. So that's kind of unfortunate, but make it work. Okay, so it looks like there's a professional version and there's a free version that you can download. I'm going to go ahead and download the professional version here. And I'm going to do an ISO download because I'll be running this on a virtual server that I have. Then grab a Google Mirror. Download this. So that'll take a few minutes here. In the meantime, we can get some of our images prepped and ready to go. So I have some of these already prepped. The images for EVE-NG, unlike some of the other services that are out there, such as Viral or CML through Cisco, they have that bundled for EVE-NG. You need to supply your own images. You can extract from the ISO from CML the images and then upload them to EVE-NG. Or if you have a valid SmartNet contract, you can just download it. So in this case, what I did was I have a CML license, and at some point I'll probably stand up CML as well. I just, again, want that flexibility, so that if I want to run something else aside from a Cisco image, I have the ability to do so. But these are all images that I got from the CML download. I grabbed it out of the ISO file. This is fairly common to do. I haven't heard of anybody having any issues with Cisco overdoing something like that. So I have all these here. I am going to copy those over to EVE-NG once we get it up and running. Looks like the download here is complete. As always, whenever you download something from the internet, you want to make sure that it's proper. So we have a couple of checksums here that we can test against. So we can run this image through a SHA-256 algorithm, and we can validate that the checksum that we received is what's posted here on the website. That'll make sure it'll validate that the file we just downloaded is proper, hasn't been manipulated, anything like that. We'll go ahead and do that. So we can do a SHA-256 sum on the EVE Pro that we just downloaded. That'll eventually spit out checksum for us to validate. There we go. All right, there we go. So this is good to go from a checksum standpoint. Let's go ahead and get this installed. There should be some documentation here of how to set this all up. So let's take a look. So we'll look at the professional cookbook. A little small, so we'll download it. See if they have a section here for ESXi installation, which we did right here. So it looks like even in their manual, they indicate that this is the preferred method of installing. So let's go to that page, page 26. All right, so this looks like a generic VM installation. Okay. So a lot of these softwares, they want you to run on a bare metal, but you can typically just virtualize it and run it as a VM. I have a couple of rack mount servers, so that's what I'll be doing here today. That way I have the flexibility to shut down the virtual machine if I want to use something different, like bounce between EVE-NG and maybe Viral. Gives me a little bit more flexibility. So we're going to create a new virtual machine, call this EVE-NG, see what the documentation wants us to select. Just a little bit bigger, that way we can see it. Okay, so it looks like it wants us to put this inside of the VM store. So what I'll have to do is copy this image over to the EVE-NG server, the server that will be running EVE-NG on, and then from there, I'll be able to deploy it. Yeah, for CCNA, packet tracer, it's perfectly fine. The only reason that I'm using EvenG is so that I have flexibility down the line for some CCNP level topics. Me personally, I already have my CCNA years ago, and about halfway through my NP, heading towards IE. But I'm kind of circling back and creating some training courses to help out some people, kind of get the people that are just getting into the networking field. So packet tracer is perfectly fine. You don't need to do anything more than that for the CCNA. Once you get over to the CCNP realm, that's when you're going to want to start looking at things like viral, GNS3, even G. That's when you'll really need to start leaning on that. But CCNA, you're perfectly fine with packet tracer. So this is over here. Now what I'll have to do is I'll have to log into the server that I copied this over to, and I'll have to put it into the data store because I didn't actually place it there yet. So we can see here, here's the file that I copied over. Similar to how when I downloaded this, it's best to do a SHA-256 test against the image just to make sure that nothing was lost in transit. Thing 10K, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it, man. What do we got here? Actually, this doesn't look like it matches. 5B11. Yeah, so you can tell that something odd happened with this image. This was the original size here before we copied it over, and we were getting the proper SHA value when we hashed it through, and now we're not getting that here. So for some reason, this didn't transfer fully over. Not exactly sure why, but that's why we check. So let's see if we can copy this over once again. Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime. Yeah, you don't have to buy routers and switches for the CCNA. You're perfectly good with packet tracer. Really, that just comes in later down the line when you're getting to a more advanced level. That's when you're going to need some of the advanced features that are available either on physical hardware or on virtualized hardware. Packet tracer is considered to be an emulator instead of a simulator. That's really where the nuance comes in with something like GNS3 or CML versus a packet tracer program. So an emulator will emulate behavior versus a simulator will actually run through the processes as the as a host would typically run through those processes as if it was a real device. I'm getting the same hash here. It's very odd behavior. Yeah, this still doesn't matches. Wow, that's weird. Well, you know what? Worst thing that can happen is that it'll crash. So we'll go ahead with it anyway. And we'll see what happens. If not, then maybe we'll look at an OVA on the model. So let's go ahead and move this over to the data store. Should have enough storage. Let me see. Yeah, I still have 2 terabytes of data left, so there's really no reason why this shouldn't work. Fit, rather, is what I should say. We'll go ahead and we'll move this over to the store. That's done. So once this use a Linux Ubuntu 64-bit image, which is 64-bit data store that we're going to use. Let's see what settings it wants. Do you need to know Python to pass CCNA? You need to know some basic. I don't want to say it's Python specifically that you need to understand, but you need to understand topics that relate to API calls and JSON payloads. So if we take a look at the CCNA certification document here, where we have the exam topics, and this is something that I was going to go over in a little bit, but we can kind of take a look at it now. You can see that the exam is broken down into 5 or 6 different areas like network fundamentals and so forth. What you're speaking of is automation and programmability. So this is where they want you to explain various topics of automation and programmability, not necessarily how to implement it. I believe that's where Cisco kind of diverges and goes into the what they call it, the DevNet curriculum. I think that's when you start getting into that. But they want you to understand basic concepts, such as controller-based networking, separation of control plane and data plane, northbound and southbound APIs, and things of that nature. So there's nothing here that says specifically you need to be able to write Python. Like if I search Python, there's nothing that's shown up here on this page. That being said, in actuality, in real life, there's a lot of Python that's used by network engineers. I use it on a fairly frequent basis. I don't want to say daily, but pretty much every other day I'm using it to achieve the goals of the organization. Okay, so it wants me to set the number of processors and cores per processor. It wants us to make sure the virtualization is enabled. So for my host here, I have a rack mount server, so I'll be allocating all the cores that I can to it. We're not locking any of the cores, so it's not like this is being dedicated to this specific virtual machine. It'll just be time sliced. So in this case, we'll give 40 cores. And did it have a dedicated core per socket? Set the number of cores and number of cores. Okay. It looks like it wants us to keep that at 1, which is fine. Circle back to that in a minute. Let's see the desirable amount of RAM. We can add whatever we want. I think I have 128 gigs in this host. Again, this will all be shared between the guests, so it's not being locked. All my other VMs will continue to operate as expected. Really, this is only going to be an issue if you, and I need to do that in gigs. I'll probably 100. Redo it later. Yeah, so this isn't dedicated to the machine. It kind of just splits between all the various hosts. Which hard drive do we need? Recommended to set 500 in a thick provisioned, eagerly provisioned configuration. Okay, so we'll set the hard drive at 500 gigs as recommended. Thick provisioned, eagerly zeroed, which is the same thing as eagerly provisioned. So the network adapter. So the network adapter on my side, I have a couple of different networks. I'm just going to choose VM network because that's what works for my particular environment. CD DVD. This is where we need to put in the ISO. So if we look at the data store, let me copy this over to the images bucket. I don't remember where I put my images, so I gotta find them. Here. know it's in here somewhere. I forgot. So that's right. Can't remember the command. Do a recursive search. Stack Overflow's your friend. Oh, was I missing a star? That's what it was. No. Try it again. There it is. Interesting. I was in the wrong data store. Okay. That's my fault. FS, volumes, 5, F1s. There we go. Oh, I got an old version of Eve here. Forgot I ran that previously. Okay. Yeah, so we can edit in here. So we need to move it out of here. Pro to this location. This thing's got to fail. Even the old copies were much bigger. Okay, well, we'll see what happens. I guess we could use one of the old images if we really need to. Select. Okay. We'll have to power it on. So this may take a bit since it has to actually zeroize the entire 500 gig partition. So we'll see how long that takes. In the meantime, we can see what was our objective. So we got the download done. We got copied the Cisco images over to it, but that's after the VM's already up and running. And then we'll do some basic testing to validate it's working. Review the CCNA exam topics. Okay, so I guess we can do that in the meantime while we're waiting for this to finish up. This. Wow, they stripped out a good amount since I last took this exam. I don't even see BGP in here. No BGP. No OSPF. Wow. I guess they pushed BGP up to being a CCNP topic. All right, it's still running at 12%, so we'll have to see. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. What do we have? We have network fundamentals, explain the role and functions of various networking components like routers, layer 2 and layer 3 switches, next generation firewalls, access points. Access points and controllers look to be a little bit new from when I took the exam last. Point servers, PoE, I think that was there. 2 tier, 3 tier was there, spine and leaf. Okay, on-premise and cloud. That looks to be new. What else? There are physical interfaces and cabling types like single mode and multi-mode fiber and copper. Oh, this looks pretty standard. Crazy here. So in the meantime, we wait. I guess I can show you Packet Tracer. Packet Tracer from the Cisco Net Academy is a great tool that can be used for CCNA training purposes. You don't need any images, and it's also pretty lightweight. It really doesn't take up a lot of resources on your computer, so um, it's a pretty good tool to use, and it's actually perfect for CCNA training. You don't have to go crazy with downloading a bunch of images like what I'm doing. See, can I just download this and go? Let me go enroll here. Hold on. Go download. Well, that is just awful. You should just be able to download this. It's crazy. So I believe even on the website, they also have a study guide in addition to the exam topics themselves. So if you're not good at structuring your training routine, you can take a look at some of the um, resources that they provide to you in that regard as well. It's study plan right here. So this goes over the CCNA blueprint, and basically it's like a little checkbox. Like, did you study this? Did you study this? Do you understand it? I think the main takeaway with these CCNA exams, where maybe a lot of people kind of get a bit confused, is that they think they need to know something that more in depth than what they actually need to know. So when you're looking at this exam blueprint, and it's telling you that you need to explain the roles and functions of this equipment, you have to look at the verbs that are being used to describe all of these different elements. You're going to see words like compare or describe. You don't have to take any action in those scenarios, but if you look at certain things like configure, then that's an action, right? You need to know how to configure IP addressing. Typically, this also indicates that you need to know how to validate and also troubleshoot. Like if you configure an IP address, how do you know that it took? What show commands can you issue to validate that? What tests can you run to validate it's operating as you expect it to? So you want to take a look at what these verbs are indicating as well. Some of these things you don't need to know how to configure necessarily unless it says so explicitly. Like when it says describe an IPv6 address and what the types are, at no point is it saying that you need to understand how to configure an IPv6 address or troubleshoot IPv6 routing, for example. So those are just things to kind of look out for. If you're willing to go into the deep end, by all means, but I see a lot of times people kind of stress out on these particular areas, going crazy trying to configure and validate and troubleshoot when they're really just asking you to describe something, to show that you have a basic understanding of whatever that topic is. Review and spanning tree. Okay, that's good. I'm curious what the difference is between this version and the old version that I previously took. I know I don't see BGP here, and that was definitely on the previous exam. See if somebody enumerated all the differences. So here's the old exam blueprint. Okay, yeah, they had some like EIGRP. That's not in the new exam either anymore. Looks like they got rid of that as well as BGP. Yeah, so and they also expanded this out. I know that um, they have now a different DevNet exam. Like when you were asking about Python, they have for certifications, they've now expanded the CCNA out into another area for DevNet, I believe is what they call it. And yeah, DevNet Associate. So this should be where you learn or are required to know Python, as well as other development type of workflows. I'm assuming CI/CD pipelines is part of that, APIs, automation, things of that nature. Yeah, so data formats. Let's see. Yep, construct a Python script that calls a REST API. Yep, some Docker. Yeah, so this is where you would start getting into the Python side of things and how you make those type of requests. And there's a lot of stuff that's on the internet about that. I plan on doing a little bit of that as well with in terms of tutorials. I do a fair bit of API work with Python and using the request library, among other things. So at some point, I'll be making some content around that as well. I'm not sure if that'll be more demand versus a uh, generic traditional CCNA program. Yeah, a good CCNA book I would recommend is directly from Cisco Press. It would be Wendell Odom. He has really good training material. Him and Tom Lindley, they both are very, very good. I personally always used Wendell Odom. He can be a little dry, to be honest with you. I think Tom Lindley has a little bit more personality, but I just learned better off of Wendell Odom. So yeah, this one right here. And what's kind of cool about this, what I would recommend that you look at if you're doing like Cisco stuff, check out Cisco Press. So on their website, they have for all their certifications, like if anybody created a book for them, no matter whoever the author is, it'll be here, and you can get either hard copies or soft copies. But what's kind of cool about the ebooks is you typically have some sort of practice tests that get included with it as well. So like the 200-301 right here. Usually when there's like an ebook version of it, it'll come with a premium edition where you can get some sort of software to download to do like simulations or some sort of practice test with it. At least that's what it used to be last time I did it. Let's see. Let's see. The premium edition contains an enhanced version of the Pearson test prep with four full practice exams. Yeah, so you get 4 practice exams with this for the digital copy that you can download. I'll drop a link in the chat for you. Yeah, anytime. I'm still messing around with the audio settings. Do I sound clear? All right, let me see. It's still going 25%. Okay. So do you have any Python experience, or are you just getting started with it? I was trying to see if there was a quick and easy public API that we could leverage real quick in programming. Are you a traditional network engineer or something along those lines, or are you just breaking into it? Depends on what you're trying to do. So if you're going into something deep like AI, machine learning, then yeah, you're gonna need to know a heavy amount of math. If you're not really going that deep into it, then you really don't need to know anything crazy. It's just when you get into like deep statistical analysis is when it comes into play. You know, it's a good thing to do if you get a chance to do so, and you're interested in programming in general. There's a variety of websites that you can use, like Leak Code and things of that nature. But um, one Advent of Code is something that I recently just came across, and it basically just gives you a puzzle. So you'll get all these different puzzles day by day, and you can kind of select like whatever programming language that you want to use to go through this. It could be Python, it could be something else. It doesn't really matter. But you kind of have this scenario that you are provided, and you have to come up with what the answer is. So it's kind of a good way to get into like solving puzzles. At least I thought it was pretty cool the first time that I came across it. Are you familiar with Linux? I think maybe a little bit. Okay. Yeah, I think maybe at least in my experience, a lot of people that kind of get into programming, they it's usually when they start automating various workflows within like a Linux environment. So if there's some sort of data processing that they need to do to make their lives easier, um, they write scripts, basic things instead of doing it line by line through the command prompt. You kind of iterate through and do it. So that's a good place to start. Even if it's doing something like kind of what I was doing today, right? I have the file that I'm copying back and forth from the server from my desktop. You can do something where what if you have more than one file and you need to check the SHA sum off of that, right? And you need to validate that it's what you expect it to be. Like, how could you write a quick script to kind of automate that, right? Um, so if I had something like, get rid of this. So here's a list of all the images, all the Cisco images that I'll eventually get loaded up to Eve. That way we can lab out the various environments. So all these have a signature, right? If you run this through a SHA algorithm, it'll give you a hash, and you'll know whether or not when you copy the file, if the file made it intact to the destination. So I could manually go through and say, I don't know, MD5 this image, and then I'll get whatever the hash is, but then I have to do that for every image that's here. So even with what you're used to, like ls and print working directory and things of that nature, if you do like an ls-1, you get a list of all the files that are in my current directory. So instead of going through line by line and doing it one at a time, I could do something like for I in ls-1, which is the list of all of those image names, do md5 sum against the variable of I, and then done to finish up the loop. And then it just goes through for every file that was in this directory. It'll do the md5 sum, and it'll spit out the results here. This is just a quick way of doing it from the terminal, but if I wanted to, I could write up a bash program that effectively does the same thing in a loop sequence, and you can get all of the data that way instead of having to do it one by one, line over line. But it's a quick and easy way to kind of get your hands dirty with routine day-to-day things that kind of make your life a little bit easier, and then you start thinking a bit more logically, like how a programmer would, right? Like, what steps do I need to take? What sequence do I need to perform those steps? What if this error condition occurs? Because that's a lot of what you think about as a programmer is, well, what if I don't get the expected data? What could happen to my program? How could that throw an error in it? That's kind of like a unit testing thing. 34. Sweet Jesus. This is going to take a while. Didn't expect it to take this long. So it is, I guess. Yeah, so let's see here. So we have that in the code. So what's the problem? The elves take turns writing down the number of calories contained by various meals, snacks, rations, and etc. That they brought with them, one item per line. Each elf separates their own inventory from the previous elf's inventory by a blank line. For example, here are the number of calories for each elf. First elf is carrying food with 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 calories for a total of 6,000. Second elf is carrying one item with 4,000. Third elf is carrying food with 5,000 and 6,000 calories for a total of 11,000. And the fourth is carrying 7, 8. Okay, got it. They're hungry and need extra snacks. They need to know which elf who. They need to know which elf to ask. They'd like to know how many calories are being carried by the elf carrying the most calories. When you look at these things at face value, this kind of looks like a problem that you would never have to deal with. Um, but in a weird way, you do run into things like this sometimes, where there's some business requirement to gather some data, um, and you have to write some logic that's very similar to this to like iterate through a list of values and grab the greatest or the largest entry that's in that data set. So in this case, it's kind of the same thing as that. You just have to kind of do some math and add up the lines. So there's a bunch of input here. This is all separated by a new line. It's an interesting problem. So I guess you have to use a line break for that blank new line as a way to segment one out from the other. Then you would have to reset your current count. Otherwise, you'd be carrying over the current count from the previous count, and then you would have to sort that value. That's what I want to see. See what other certs it came out with since it refreshes. It's package wizard trial software. When I had it, it wasn't. I'm not sure if it is now. If Cisco changed something, but as for the last time that I used it, there was no trial period. You could. The problem was getting the software. I think you had to be signed up through like the Netacad system, um, which at that time when I did it, you could just create a Cisco account and you could download it and get access for your testing. I would imagine it's the same as today as it was back then, but you'd have to try to download and see if it works. So it looks like CyberOps is new. So the CCNA got split out into different areas. Yeah, this is much different from the last time that I was in this area. So they used to have CCNA routing and switching, security, service provider. It looks like they kind of segmented that out and put that all under the NP umbrella. Okay, so they want you to get just a baseline knowledge set at the associate level, and then the professional level is where you dig into the details in the individual disciplines. Topics. So did they give you an area that you can download the packet tracer since you signed up? Honestly, I think I like this exam format a little bit better. instead of forcing people into a security bucket, service provider bucket, or anything like that at the associate level, you get them a base understanding of the material that can be used by any of these professions, and then from there, depending upon what you're interested in, you kind of get a taste, and you can go from there for whatever you're trying to target. I think I like that better than the previous way that they were doing this. You're downloading it from Google Play. Oh, they have a mobile package tracer. I didn't know that. Really? You want to be cybersecurity? Yeah. Well, the thing is about cybersecurity, you need to know a little bit about everything. At least in my experience and dealing with some of the security folks that we work with, um, security is a big umbrella. So you're touching the network domain, you're touching servers and virtualization domains. If you're in a certain sector of business, you may be dealing with like call processing equipment or SCADA systems. So yeah, it's a pretty broad knowledge set that you need to have for security. Networking is definitely one of the things, but it's not the only thing. So if you look at like the cybersecurity exam that they have here for the CCNA, well, it's not CCNA, but it's a associate level cyber um, certification program that they have here. There's a lot of different technologies that are here. Some of them are a bit more generic, like seams and network entry points and agentless versus agent-based protections. That's kind of independent of any individual sector of a business. But you have some of the other things like TCP dump, for example. That's typically something that you do at the server side. NetFlow and firewalls. This is all networking stuff. This is definitely networking stuff, although some of that can be server side as well. Like an ACL could be on a router, for example. But you could use some things on the server side, like IP tables. That is effectively an ACL. It's just on a server, so that's a way that you could do it there. Load balancing. Yep, that's something that you'll need to know about as well. Let's see, man of the middle attacks, denial of service, distributed denial of service. Pretty generic. There's nothing specific there. I'm assuming that they'll talk about like DNS amplification attacks, source IP spoofing, buffer overflows. Yep, there's buffer overflows. Yep, asymmetric or symmetric key encryption. Certificates are big. Yep. If you're looking to do cybersecurity, it may actually benefit you more not to do the CCNA and to do this version of the associate level where you're doing cyber ops. Um, Obviously, your mileage may vary. This is a individual decision that you need to make, but depending upon what your needs are, I would take a look through these exam topics on this cybersecurity exam, and I would compare that with the CCNA and take a look at how that aligns with your goals and what your objectives are. Because the CCNA exam, it's purely a networking model from a networking perspective, things that you need to know, how routing works, how switching works. To a certain degree, some of them will transfer over, like OSI models and stuff like that. How encapsulation works. That's all kind of, I think that is a fundamental topic that should be covered within both of them. But if you're looking for something a bit more security centric and that's what you're gunning for, it may actually benefit you more to do a cybersecurity associate exam certification because that's a bit more along the pathway that you're interested in and you're looking to walk. Does it teach basic networking principles? Let's see. So we have security concepts, security monitoring, host-based network intrusion analysis. So what do we have under here? So for network intrusion analysis, we have mapped to provided events and source technologies. So IDS or IPS firewalls, source technologies. So this isn't really giving you anything from a network basic perspective. Let's see. Nope, that isn't going to give you anything. So this may give you a little bit deep packet inspection versus packet filtering and stateful firewall operation. That may give you a little bit of insight for how a firewall operates, but that doesn't necessarily tell you how traffic is like routed per se from one area of a network to another. compare inline traffic to taps or traffic monitoring. Characteristics of data. Yeah, so I don't see anything here that's going to give you a true basis in networking. It looks like it teaches you some elements of networking, like what a source address and destination address is, and ports and protocols and stuff like that. I would imagine that somewhere within this, it goes into some level of detail of how packets get from where they're going to where they're going to, but they don't explicitly state that. I guess it depends on your organization and how deep they want you to be in this. I will say that for my company, the security team is not expected to understand or necessarily know how traffic is routed from source to destination. That's really not their job. Their job is really to manage the incident and investigate the incident, root cause analysis, if you will. It's not like they're hopping into switches, firewalls, or load balancers and um, parsing route tables or switching Ethernet switching tables. They're really just looking through like logs for the most part to kind of form a picture of what happened as a as an overall picture of beginning to end what happened during that time of that security event. So I guess it depends on your company. I mean, it's not going to hurt you. More knowledge is not going to hurt you. Um, it's a personal decision you have to make for yourself if it's worth to you if it's worth it to you to pursue that knowledge. Yeah, it looks like for the most part, looking through this, as you would expect, this is pretty much just focusing from a security aspect. The various network elements like access control lists, packet captures, firewall, traffic processing, things of that nature. It's just looking at things through a narrow security lens, which is what you would expect for a security certification. So that makes sense. Yeah, so your CCNA, your traditional, if you want to call it that CCNA, that's really where you get into the nuts and bolts of everything of how it operates. So you'll have to configure IP addressing, you'll have to configure basic routing, you'll have to understand how packets get to and from their destination. You'll have to understand how a switch builds its MAC address table when it floods frames versus sends unicast frames. Um, Understanding the difference between trunks and access ports. Let's see. So here's when you get into connectivity. So you'll get into the administrative distance, how a router makes its decisions for what it considers to be the best route. Um, yeah, 4%. And on packet tracer, when you enroll in one of the 3 self-paced packet tracer courses, okay. CCNA Good Network Foundation for a beginner. If I pass CCNA, you don't need the Network Plus. Um, I never really considered the CCNA and the Network Plus to be the same thing, in the same playing field. So I had Network Plus a while ago before they expired the certificates. I think I had like a lifetime one, and the exam, if I remember correctly, and I'll pull up the exam details here, but it really wasn't to the level of the CCNA. Like you understood the OSI model, ports, and protocols, how things operated from a high level, but you didn't really get into the actual routing of traffic from one device to another. You didn't understand necessarily how a switch builds its MAC address table. You don't get into the finer nuances of how do you aggregate a link, right? Like if you have 2 devices and you need one big fat pipe so that you can push a lot of data through it, how do you combine multiple links to achieve that goal? And then how do you load balance across those links so you don't saturate any given link? That's stuff that you kind of learn on the CCNA pathway. The Network Plus was more of a, I don't want to say generic, but it's more of a basic kind of applies to everything approach where it's still good knowledge. It's not that the knowledge is bad, but I just think that it's 2 different things. So let's see if we can find some exam topics maybe for this. Maybe we can do a quick comparison. For all I know, this could have changed over time, and maybe they have more in detail topics. So let's see. Establish network connectivity by deploying wired and wireless devices. Understand and maintain network documentation. The purpose of network services, basic data center, cloud, and network virtualization concepts. Monitoring networking activity. Identify performance and availability issues. Okay. So actually, this seems to be a bit more beefier than what it was when I took it. Let's see. I was hoping for more of a breakdown than just a generic high level overview. So you know what? It looks like maybe the Network Plus teaches you a lot of similar things to, say, a CCNA, but the CCNA is very Cisco centric. So I imagine that you're going to, from a Net Plus perspective, understand how these things operate. So when you deploy network connectivity, what does that look like? They may give you some basic examples, but you probably just have to really understand from a fundamental level. Like they're not going to quiz you on what syntax do you need to use to put an IP on an interface or something like that. I don't know if you've ever taken any of the Cisco exams, but the Cisco exams are very specific and particular with what they're asking of you. So if you're expected to know how an access control list operates, they may ask you point blank, what command do you issue to configure an extended access list? And you need to know that, right? That's specific to their platform. Whereas I think Network Plus is more of a generic, because there's more than one network manufacturer, right? Like you can have Cisco, you can have Juniper, you can have, there's another one, escapes me off the top of my head. Brocade was another one. The Cisco SD-WAN Cloud. So if we go back to the certificates that we have here, here we go, implementing Cisco SD-WAN solutions. So this is a higher level topic, which is under the CCNP umbrella. So the CCNP umbrella, that kind of changes around where you have all of these various professional level certifications. So it used to be that you would take a route, switch, and troubleshoot. So you would take 3 exams to become a CCNP. But now they have a base exam for the CCNP, which is considered like a core technologies exam. So you take that. That is the basis for your CCNP, where you can then get into different disciplines from there. So if you want to go into more routing stuff, you can do an RC here. If you want to do the SD-WAN solution, which I think is Viptela, you can do that here. If you want to go into design, you can do that here. They have a wireless track, so you can kind of see how it breaks out into different areas. Here's an automation one with Python programming and APIs. So that may be interesting as well if you're into that. But you can see how it kind of breaks out into all the various different areas. So it looks like you would get, if you're interested in that, you would do the Encore exam first, and then you would branch out from there to the SD-WAN side. I'm curious to see if they have something similar under the service provider, maybe, because they should have a service provider core exam followed by a series of complementary exams as well. Yeah, okay, so we have the security core, or sorry, not security, the service provider core, followed by the advanced routing service provider. Let's see, VPNs, automation. Okay, so SD-WAN isn't a part of that. It looks like it's part of the enterprise. Part of the enterprise. I think Cisco is the king of networking. Yeah, I mean, Cisco is still very relevant today. It really depends on my observation has been it depends on what area of networking you operate in. Cisco is definitely heavy in the enterprise world. However, I've been seeing over the years that service providers have been switching to Juniper. So there's a lot of service provider technology out there that's now using the Juniper platform. So yeah, I guess it depends on what area of networking you're looking to deal with. If you're dealing with just like enterprise level connectivity, then you may see more Cisco devices. And then if you're a service provider, you may see more Juniper. But truth be told, in all likelihood, no matter what company you go to, you're probably going to have a mix. I've seen networks that had Juniper routers with Cisco switches. I've seen Dell switches and HP switches, Aruba access points. So I wouldn't be surprised if you went to any company and you found at least 3 different hardware vendors in the network. It's not often that you see only one provider in a given enterprise environment. Usually there's like a compliance thing associated with that. Like I think a lot of the governmental sector uses basically Cisco only. So, but Cisco still holds weight. Like every, if it's not even a comparison, if you look at like the demand for certifications out there, there's not many that look for like a Juniper certified whatever. For the most part, they're looking for like CCNA, CCNPs. Like Cisco just has set the bar from a certification perspective. So it's not like you're going to go wrong. And if you really think about it, the core technologies are effectively the same. Routing and switching and firewalling is more or less the same. There may be some things that Cisco does differently versus Juniper versus Arista, whatever it is. But the core concepts are there. So you may have to learn new syntax that's different from what you're used to if you took like a Cisco exam. Maybe you use a different show command to get the same type of data. But for the most part, the core technology is going to be the same, and it's applicable across the domains. 65%. Yeah, so let's see if I'm done with this. Started. Sign up. Is Juniper harder than Cisco? At first, I wouldn't say that it's harder. I would just say that it's different. it's not that it's necessarily harder, it's just a different framework. So the way that I kind of think about it is Juniper kind of works in a hierarchy. So if you kind of think about like a directory inside of a Linux environment, you have like your home directory, and then you can go from there into the subdirectories. It kind of operates in a similar manner where you can step up and step down the hierarchy. They refer to it as a stanza, and then you can configure the various elements that fall within the stanza. So if you're looking to put like an IP address on an interface, you would do like edit interface, yada yada yada, and from there you would put in the IP address. Or you could do like a set interfaces, whatever the interface is, followed by the IP address. So it's just a little bit different from that perspective. At the end of the day, once you like get into it and you get used to it, like when I first started on Cisco, I started on Cisco first. It was new to me. I didn't know what I was doing either, and you kind of just stumble your way through it and you get used to it. It's kind of the same thing on the Juniper side. The only difference is like you already know like what to do on Cisco, so it was a little bit easier in that regard because you can kind of just Google and say, hey, how do I do X, Y, or Z from Cisco on a Juniper? And there's usually like a blog post out there of somebody who ran into the same exact problems you did 2 years ago. And there was actually a document that I found somewhere a number of years ago that kind of said line for line, like this command on Cisco is this command on Juniper. And it was like a little cheat sheet that you could use. But I actually ended up liking Juniper a little bit better. It has some quality of life stuff that Cisco really didn't have. So in like Cisco, whenever you enter, you hit enter on the keyboard, the configuration takes effect immediately. So if you mess up, you're going to know right then and there. Whereas with Juniper, you have to commit your change. So if I wanted to take an IP address off an interface, when I do that in Cisco, it happens immediately. But in Juniper, I have to commit that configuration for that change to take effect. So if I do something by accident, on a Juniper device, it doesn't take effect immediately. I can revert that change that's staged. It's almost like a commit system if you think about it that way in like GitHub. So you like stage your changes and then you commit your changes. And then once the changes are committed, that's when they take effect. And they kind of built in some nice quality of life stuff as well. So you can schedule commits to happen at some time in the future. You can configure an automatic rollback so that if you're making some questionable changes or you're not sure that the changes are going to negatively, if they're going to negatively impact the platform that you're working on, you can schedule it to automatically roll back in like 5 minutes, for example, so that if you commit a change and maybe the network starts degrading in performance and you can't get into the box, it'll just automatically revert the change unless you reapply and recommit that configuration. So it's pretty nice from that regard. Is a Juniper command line like a script? No, not really. It's like any other command line. Although it is OpenBSD based, so it is a Linux based, no different than like even Cisco. Cisco's pretty much the same. Let's see. Yeah, but the one thing that is nice with Juniper is that you can do a lot of network automation with it pretty easily. You can. It has native support for what is it? Can't remember off the top of my head, but it has native support for a network automation. So you can run scripts. Um, you can connect to it and you can push configuration changes from a centralized place, either by making not like an API call, but kind of like an API call. You can make a call to it and you can push a config. And I even think that there's an automated way to do it through the Juniper platform. I think it's called Junospace. They have some software director, kind of like an ASDM, if you've ever used that for like a Cisco firewall, except it goes across their platforms. So you have this one pane of view, if you will, where you can see your router, switches, firewalls, and if you want to make a change, you can make a change right from that Junospace to all those devices. And the nice thing about Juniper as well is that the syntax is the same. The one thing that that was always annoying to the Cisco side of things was if you were in a firewall versus a router, you had different syntaxes that you had to use for the same thing. But that's not the case with Juniper. It's pretty much all the same. Okay. Looks like I was able to get download. Can people use VI to configure Cisco config files and save a Cisco router or runs on the device? So are you talking about staging a configuration file for the device to use? And then you would just load that configuration file? Oh, I see what you mean. No, it doesn't operate like that. So there's and I'm going to see if I can get Packet Tracer. I just got a download for it. I'm going to see if I can get it up and running to kind of show you what it looks like. But there's a there's a there's a running config that the device uses for the configuration of it, and you, in a sense, you edit that through the command line, but it's not in the way that you're thinking from like a Linux environment where you would like open a file, make a change, and then write that file. You open your terminal and you're inside the shell of the host, which is effectively like you had the file open. And from there, you make your changes and then you save those changes. But you never actually leave the terminal to do any of that. You don't have to upload a file for that to happen. You do that all within the device itself. You can save the configuration, like if you were, say, bootstrapping a new device, so you were doing like, I don't know, a swap or something to that effect, you could save like a copy of the configuration and then configure the device to pull the copy of that configuration over the network. Or even just copy and paste effectively the contents of the configuration into the terminal, which is kind of the same thing. You can do it that way if you wanted to, but you really don't. There's never been a need that I've seen practically that requires you to copy a config file from one device to another outside of like a replacement scenario. You wouldn't do that on like a day-to-day basis. I'm actually getting it to install here, which is nice, since it's still taking a bit. We're at 73%, but I'll see if I can lock something up and kind of show you what it looks like. Okay. So here's Packet Tracer. Let me see if I can maybe zoom this in a little bit. All right, so there's a, generally speaking, what Packet Tracer down below is where all your hosts are going to live, so your routers, your switches, firewalls, and devices like computers and stuff like that. So usually I just grab a generic router. So I'll grab this device and I'll grab this device. Let's see, we can grab a switch. Then usually there's like a little, almost like a Thunderbolt icon. This is for your connection, so you can specify different cable types, which is kind of a CCNA topic, but you'll get into straight through cables versus crossover cables versus serial. But you can just hit this little Thunderbolt and it'll automatically select it for you. I'm going to select gig 01 on this guy. That. So all of these nodes should be running. You shouldn't have to start any of this up. And you can configure them all. Hopefully you can see this. I know that it's kind of small. Maybe I can more. Hopefully that helps. So you can like swap out the various modules and things of that nature. That you really don't need to know that from a CCNA perspective, but there are different modules that you have here, like a 4-port Ethernet switching module. You can connect T1 modules and stuff like that. But where you would want to get into it is the CLI aspect. So this is the terminal itself of the router, and this is where you would go to configure it to operate. Way to increase this. I don't think this gets any bigger, so hopefully you can see it. But this is where you would start configuring things. So you would have to go into enable mode, which allows you to start looking at the configuration elements of the device. So you can do like a show IP interface brief, and this will give you a list of the interfaces, what their status is. So we have, for example, this interface that's currently unassigned. There's no IP address assigned here. It's currently disabled. You can see that by administratively down. If this was enabled, but it was down due to like nothing being connected, then it would just show down. And if we want to do a quick test, we could do something like connection here between these two devices. So this connects to gig 01. This connects to gig 01. So we have gig 01 on both ends. So we can do something like configure. So this is when I go into configuration mode, and then I would say interface gigabit Ethernet 01. So first I enter configuration mode because I'm going to configure this device, and then I go into the interface that I would like to configure, and then you can hit like the question mark, and it'll show you all of the commands that you can issue for this particular interface. So if I want to put like an IP address on, I could say IP address is say 10.0.0.1, and then 255.255. So I'll give it a /24. And subnetting is part of the CCNA, and I'll be making like a whole video series on it, so I won't get into the details now, but basically we're just giving the device an IP address on this interface, and we're going to do no shutdown, because right now the interface is administratively disabled, but now it is no longer. So we can see that the interface is up, but the protocol is down. So right now the interface is enabled, it has an IP address, but it's currently down from a protocol standpoint because it doesn't see the other router. The link looks down, and that's because this other router over here doesn't have an IP address configured. The interface isn't set up yet. So if we go to this device, and we go into enable mode, and we go into interface gig 01, IP address is 10.0.0.2, so same network. Shut IP interface brief. So now we're up and up, right? So up and up means that from an administrative standpoint, the interface is enabled. From a protocol standpoint, which is effectively an operational standpoint, the interface is up. So we can see that we're connected to something. So
What we could do then is we can test, do we have reachability from this router right here to this router right here? And we can do that through a basic ping test. So ping 10.0.0.1. The first ping is going to fail because we need to generate an ARP entry, but then we see that the rest of it goes through with the successive exclamation points. So then if we do like a show ARP, we can see that now we have an ARP table entry. And I realize this may be a little bit small to see, so maybe I can copy this out. That didn't help. Copy, paste. Okay. So hopefully this is a little bit easier to see, but on the device itself, I went to enable mode. When you're in enable mode, you can do, first I should say that when you see the caret, you don't have a lot of access into the router. You could do some basic things, but you can't see everything. So you have to go into enable mode. After you're in enable mode or privilege exec mode, I think it's a technical term for it. That's when you can see more advanced show information like show ARP or show IP interface brief, for example. From there, you go into configuration mode. You go into configuration mode whenever you want to change something about that device. So in this case, I went into the configuration mode. I went into the interface of where this router is connecting to the other device. I assigned the IP address. I turned the interface on because by default it's disabled administratively. When that happened, we got a syslog message that said this interface is now up and that there was a configuration change made from the console of the device. And this is just a command, show IP interface brief. We can see all the interfaces on the device, current status, and all that. And then this is where we did our ping test. So we pinged out to the other router. We validated that we have reachability. If we didn't have reachability, then it would just be all 4 periods. And then instead of an 80% ping success, we would have a 0% ping success. The first ping always fails because you have to generate an ARP entry. So you can see how we have an ARP entry here now. So if we did something like, so we have router 1. If we go to router 0, which is the other side, so we have router 0, router 1. So this is router 0. This is router 1 on the right-hand side. So we got these two devices. So if I did something like on this device, shut. So I shut down the link on this router here on this interface. And because I did that, now we don't have reachability to each other. So if I do a show ARP, notice my ARP table is now missing. So if I go and I turn this back on, now my link is back up. And my ARP table is back. Yeah, it can be. Some of the things that can be confusing, I will say, with the Cisco interface is that you're not always clear about where you sit. So, for example, I have two interfaces on this device. You'll notice that my prompt changes when I went into the configuration mode for this device. So, for example, I went into the configuration mode, it reflects here, and then I went one step further and I went down into the interface. So I'm in configuration mode, and I'm in configuration mode for an interface. If you're in a device and you're changing a lot of things, sometimes you can kind of get lost about where you are. Am I on this interface? Am I on another interface? And that isn't really clearly indicated here. And that's one of the nicer things that I like about Juniper is that you can step down into the syntax, and it gives you an indicator of where you are in the current step down of that syntax. And then if we take a look at the running config, so for the Cisco devices, now at this point, it's worth noting that this configuration isn't saved. If I restart this device, I lose all this configuration. So if you want to save this, then you would want to do write memory. So this writes your configuration to the memory card that's inserted in that router, or it's natively integrated. I'm assuming all the new ones are. And you can see this difference if you do so if I do a show startup configuration, look at this, there's no startup configuration present. That's because I haven't saved my file. Whereas if I do a show running configuration, here's my running configuration for the router. So let me copy this out because I know this is pretty small. So here's my running configuration for the router. A lot of this stuff you don't necessarily have to worry about for now. The important parts will be here are my interfaces. You know, one's currently shut down, one has an IP address, and that's kind of what you need to know right now. But it's not saved. So if I were to reboot this device, you would lose your IP addressing and all the configuration that you configured. So you'd have to do a write memory. And now that we did that, if we do a show startup configuration, now we have a startup config that mirrors what is currently running here. And I use a shortcut in Cisco command line. Yeah, a lot of things can be abbreviated. So, for example, we have a command show IP interface brief. And that gives me a list of the interfaces. It gives me a list of the interfaces, their IP addressing, what the current status of the interface is, etc. Right? This is the full command as you write it out in the device. You can abbreviate all this if you wanted to, as long as it doesn't conflict with any other command that can be issued. So if I, for example, do if I do this. So notice that it's the same output, but effectively everything is abbreviated. Show is SH. I mean, you can't really abbreviate IP any further than what it is, but interface is int, brief is BR, but we get the same output. The device knows that there's no other combination of characters that will produce a different command. And then you can do the tab completion method. So if I do like SH tab, it'll complete the show. IP, so int tab goes to interface, BR tab goes to brief. And then throughout any point in this, you can, like if I just do show and then question mark, it'll give me a list of all the show commands that I can issue. So I can do a show clock, and it'll tell me what time the device thinks it is. But this is a really useful free tool that can be used to get your feet wet. You have pretty much every device that you need. So if you wanted to, you can bring in additional equipment as well. So if you want to bring in like a firewall, for example, you can do that. If you need some endpoints like computers, you can do that. Um, Pretty much everything you need is there. So you can kind of connect these any way that you want. So you can hook up like, I don't know, 2 computers. Computer icon. Real computer. Then we'll connect these guys. Switch. Doesn't have a port. That's weird. People back up the config, and yeah, you can back up the config. Um, that's pretty common to do when you're mainly when you're restoring from like a disaster scenario where the device is like bricked and you need to like get it up and running now. For the most part, when you're saving the backup configuration, there's typically some sort of Bastion host that is pulling the configuration. Like Rancid is an example of this. It's an open source tool that will effectively log into the network device, pull the run configuration, and it'll save it for you offline, so that you have it if you need it. Typically, you're not saving the config file on like a USB drive unless you're doing like a hardware swap and you want to upload a copy of the configuration. So it's not every day that you would run into something like that, but it is possible. All these places with configured NIC ports, it looks like. Jesus, they went crazy with this. It doesn't even come with a NIC card anymore. A wireless interface. Yeah, anytime, man. I'll be posting out an entire series on this, so if you're interested, subscribe and you'll get all the updates. And I'll be posting it out pretty closely to the exam blueprint in good detail. So if you're interested, check back in.